This is Heidi with your fire weather briefing for the eastern area for March 26, 2026. Nationally, we're at PL2 at this point in time, the earliest ever that we've gone to PL2 at the national level, so it's shaping up to be an interesting year. Fortunately, eastern area still holding on to PL1, although we definitely have seen an increase in activity and expect things to stay busy for the next few weeks. Taking a look at temperatures and precipitation so far this month, in the upper left we have the temperature anomalies across the country up until the 23rd of March, so just a couple days ago. And you can see that there is a lot of brown on this graphic, indicating that temperatures have been well above normal, especially these dark brown areas where it's been 7 to 10 degrees above normal. The closest to average has been right up here on the northern tier of some of the Great Lakes states, where the white areas are right there at average. And then we take a look at precipitation, and of course these green and purple areas are well above normal. The purple areas are 300% or more of typical amounts of precipitation in these areas, so some pretty good moisture has come through Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and then also around Michigan and over into Wisconsin. But you can see there's kind of this sharp line where western Minnesota and up in the north is actually quite dry. There's also this dry sliver coming into southern Iowa and northern Missouri. And then as we get over into the mid-Atlantic, it's been damp except for this bit in southern New Jersey down into Maryland and Delaware, even the southern part of West Virginia looking pretty dry. The New England area has been a bit of a mixed bag, but there's snow on the ground there, or has been until recently, so that's been less of a concern. On satellite imagery, we can see that big high pressure is holding over the southwest and south central part of the lower 48 states, and that means hot and dry has been pushing eastward as this high moves in. So that's bringing much warmer temperatures and near record-breaking numbers for Missouri and maybe even into Illinois today. Meanwhile, high pressure off the coast has continued to move off to the east, and we do have this little low pressure system that's kind of kicked through and brought a few showers into parts of the Ohio Valley. Meanwhile, up in the north, there's more of a frontal system. I didn't try to draw it in here, but we do see a cold front starting to drop down from the north and bringing a little moisture as it comes through. For warnings and watches and advisories today, it's actually a pretty quiet day for most of eastern area. You can see this big area of pink over towards Kansas. That's red flag warnings that are out due to winds and the hot temperatures and very dry air mass, as well as dry fuels. And though we don't see that extending into Missouri, we can kind of anticipate that there's some of that hot and dry over into our AOR as well. For today, perhaps the thing that draws the eye quickest are these hot temperatures in the southwestern corner of eastern area, Missouri, southern Iowa, all the way over into Illinois and Indiana, looking for numbers to get up into the 80s, maybe even some 90s today. Beyond that, some 70s creeping farther to the north and over into the eastern part, all the way to the coast. And then up in New England, catching a little bit more of a break there with some 50s and even some 60s showing up. But you can see this colder air pooling over the northern Midwest as that cold front starts to make its move. Along with this, we do see that relative humidities are not as remarkably low as perhaps over the last couple of days, but we still see some dry numbers showing up over in the southwest and kind of along that southern corridor. There is moisture in the forecast for today. This area of precipitation here in the upper right looks like a pretty good amount coming through the Ohio Valley and extending up into New England, but we're kind of keeping an eye on this because I'm not sold on this being very widespread uniform precipitation. It's likely to be pretty showery, and that shows up here on our convective outlook. There's the chance for some pretty significant severe weather, especially from Illinois through Indiana, Ohio, and even into western Pennsylvania this afternoon. Now, with all of this, taking a look at the wind speeds, you can see that we've got some pretty significant winds, especially over towards the western part of Iowa. Speeds there getting over 20 miles per hour and maybe even approaching the 30-mile-an-hour range in some of those darker green areas. Otherwise, kind of a breezy day for much of the region, not so much in the east, although we do see some winds in the mid-Atlantic, and that's got these fire potential blocks showing a little bit more yellow out there with Still kind of a low risk, but there's definitely more of a chance. And then we have this area from Iowa over into parts of Illinois and much of Missouri where we've got a moderate risk out for this afternoon. For Friday, we see that cold air advances a little bit more to the south and really knocks those temperatures down for much of the Midwest. There's still a little bit of warmer weather holding on, perhaps in Maryland and Delaware. At the same time, this air mass is drier, so the relative humidities are dropping as it moves down. Expect to see a lot of stations getting down into the 20% range throughout much of the Midwest and down into the central Mississippi Valley. It's also drier up in New England, but there's been plenty of moisture on the ground up there, and so that really isn't elevating concerns for fire danger. We do see the band of precipitation continuing to move to the south, so most of it is out of our region by tomorrow, but there will still be some showers lingering along the Ohio Valley and over into the mid-Atlantic. For convection, things tame down quite a bit, but there's still a chance for some thunderstorms, mainly through West Virginia and over to the mid-Atlantic coast. And for significant fire potential, this knocks concerns down over in the east, but we still have the chance for some activity, especially with the drier air coming in behind this front throughout much of Minnesota, following down the Mississippi Valley, and keeping concerns elevated all the way over towards Ohio. As we get to Saturday, you can see that cold air is pretty much settled in. Warmest temperatures look to be just above 60 degrees in Missouri, otherwise quite a bit colder once again through the Northeast and along the Great Lakes. At the same time, though, humidities continue to bottom out, and Saturday looks like an extremely dry day across all of the eastern area. This is kind of emphasized by the precipitation graphic, which shows very little moisture except a few areas in New York and along the Great Lakes. Winds aren't a particular factor in most areas, but we do see this zone over to the west still holding on to some stronger wind speeds. This time it's more out of the south and focused right along the Iowa-Minnesota border. There wasn't any thunderstorm activity to speak of, so instead I've got the surface analysis here, and you can see that this big high pressure center is holding right over Illinois, so a lot of high pressure over much of the Midwest, and that is going to be what's setting up this very dry pattern for a couple of days. For significant fire potential, we've expanded the area once again for Saturday farther to the east. It does look like the northern parts of Michigan and Wisconsin are of less concern because they'll have had some recent precipitation and fuels just aren't quite as dry in those areas. Thinking about precipitation over the last 7 days and moving forward, we've got the Northeast and down into the Mid-Atlantic, even over towards Ohio, where there's been some significant precipitation throughout this past week. Meanwhile, the snowpack has retreated, and there are just a few areas in the far north that still hold on to a little bit of snow. For the next 7 days, we see that some pretty significant moisture is forecasted north of the Ohio Valley and on up into New England. However, it seems like the models may be overdoing this moisture, so let's take this with a grain of salt and say that yes, there will be some rain moving through these areas, but probably not as much as indicated here. It's certainly something we're keeping our eyes on, and at the same time we can see how dry Minnesota is expected to be, and there are some areas there that have some drier fuels that we'll be paying attention to. Looking out a little farther for the medium range, Sunday, I've highlighted this here in red because that high pressure system is still holding. It has pushed off over to the east, but there is still overall this stable air mass over most of eastern area, and that continues to bring dry air to the region as well as a chance for some gusty winds at times. So what you saw for Saturday for areas of concern on the 7-day forecast, expect more of the same on Sunday. And then on Monday, there is some moderation. We've got a front dropping down from the north, but there's also this warm front coming in from the south and west. So temperatures aren't going to be as cold. We'll see a bit of a rise once again, and the air mass will be a little bit moister as we move through early next week. So this will moderate concerns at least through Wednesday, though there are still going to be areas that are drier that just don't get any rain that might have some heightened concern. A few days of a reprieve will be very welcome, and fuels may start greening up a little bit more during that time frame. Taking a look a couple weeks out, we can see that the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day temperature outlooks keep pretty warm weather over most of our region, with just the area over Maine as being a little bit cooler. And for precipitation, it looks like we've got a chance at some above normal precip. However, let's again take that with a grain of salt and see how this precipitation forecast actually pans out. Even with some wetter areas out there on the landscape, there are places that are certainly in drought and could use a little bit more moisture. Speaking of which, taking a look at our fuels and fire behavior, here in the upper left we see the ERCs that are forecasted for the next day. We've got these areas of red down here throughout much of Missouri and southern Iowa, and though those are trending down, there's still certainly a very high concern there. These light brown areas through northern Illinois and Indiana and Ohio are a little bit on the high side, but not remarkable. And then we see this area of orange through the southern tip of Illinois, southern Indiana, and then also over into the eastern side of Ohio, down into West Virginia. These numbers are trending down, but are definitely of elevated concern. To look at some other tools out there, we've got the NASA Land Information System. This describes the soil moisture down to 100 centimeters, and you can see this very dry area all the way from the Iowa-Missouri border over through Illinois, Indiana, and to the Great Lakes. There's also an area of drier fuels up here in the eastern side of Minnesota. But what is nice to see is mostly damper fuels throughout the east. And though the drought monitor tells a similar story in these areas of the west, it shows that there is a concern for drought throughout much of Maine, into New Hampshire, and even into parts of Massachusetts, as well as the southeastern quadrant of Pennsylvania, over into New Jersey, down into Maryland and Delaware. So depending on which tool we're looking at, there are some areas of concern across many parts of the region. Our extended outlook is pretty dated at this point. We'll have a new issuance on April 1st. But overall, eastern area has no areas that are of elevated concern. Do expect to see the spring be a busy season, as it always is. But at this point, nothing looks to indicate that it will be more severe than normal or that it will extend beyond a normal spring burn period. In summary, we're moving into that prime time spring burning window, so we have the low RHs in the forecast, the fuels are quite dry, dead fuels on the ground from last year, and we've got some periods of winds in the forecast that will help to really dry out fuels quickly and elevate fire potential. The forecast models are indicating significant moisture coming through at times, but they don't always handle precipitation and relative humidities very well, especially during this spring transition season. Despite the moisture in the forecast, we do have winds as well for Thursday and Friday. That may lead to higher fire danger than you might otherwise suspect based on those elevated humidities. And then this weekend, we've got that very dry air mass coming in before we get a reprieve next week. So it looks like our heightened fire danger will last through Sunday before toning down a little bit on Monday. That concludes today's fire weather briefing. Thanks for listening and have a great week.